After that day, the lady of the house began visiting my room whenever she had the time, and when it was just the two of us, she became the kindest person imaginable. At the age of 20, that's how I came to understand women. It feels like a tale from long ago. I had been admitted to the country's top university, a true rags to riches story. I'm reminded of those days as a poor student and felt compelled to write this down. Tuition at national universities was incredibly affordable, and with a well-established scholarship system, as long as you did reasonably well, tuition wasn't a worry. However, living expenses and pocket money became an issue. My parents farmed in the countryside, and with several younger siblings, I had to take care of myself. I couldn't rely on my parents, who couldn't even take a proper break during the off-season. As they prepared for the next farming cycle, through an introduction, I became a tutor for a wealthy family. My university was, and still is, a top school, so I had no trouble finding such a position. The families looking for live-in tutors at that time either had the means, but not the time to attend to their children's education, or preferred to delegate their child's exam preparation entirely. Although I would have liked a position in a home with a pretty female student, that wasn't something I could choose. Moreover, I had never tutored before, so I had to go with the family I was introduced to. The child I was to tutor was a boy, just past puberty, in his third year of middle school, and the only son of a wealthy family that owned a large factory. His name was James. His grades were average, but he had a gentle and mild disposition. I was cautious at first, wondering if he might look down on me because he was the son of a wealthy family and I was a hired teacher. But he wasn't that kind of spoiled child. The first time I met James' mother, she struck me as quite stern, with her pale skin and black horn-rimmed glasses. She seemed very cold and aloof when she called her son and said, "This is the teacher who will be helping you with your studies. Ask him anything you don't know." James only quietly responded, seemingly unable to adapt to this unfamiliar atmosphere. When she inquired about my entrance exam scores, her cold demeanor seemed to soften slightly. She then mentioned how she envied our parents, which also helped to ease my tension. The lady of the house showed me to my room. It was a two-story house, and she told me to use the room right next to James's. It was the smallest room in James's house, but having my own room there made me feel at ease. I had been introduced to James's family in the middle of the summer break, staying uncomfortably in a senior's apartment. But upon seeing the environment at James's house, I immediately decided to move in. James' mother set 3 conditions. First, considering you're a young student with probably a lot of friends, make sure not to stay out past midnight. There should be no bringing friends over to the house, and if you come home after mealtime, you're responsible for your own food. I thought these were perfectly reasonable requests. She also mentioned that the pay would be fair, in line with what other households offer, and that there might be a little extra for improved grades, so she hoped for diligent effort. If you happen to want something to eat outside of meal times, you're welcome to use the small kitchen on the 2nd floor to make ramen or similar. Just be sure to clean up after yourself. It wasn't that I was expecting special treatment, but facing a parent who spoke so coldly was disheartening. I had brought a few clothes and my own bedding, but the housekeeper suggested I not use them, saying, "You might prefer not to use those. The lady of the house has bought new bedding so please use that instead. After being introduced to James' family by a senior, I returned to their home after having dinner and some drinks with my senior in front of the house. The lady of the house remarked, "What would the child think of you coming home drunk on your first day as a teacher? Is it okay for a university student to wander around drunk? Please pay more attention to self-management from now on." Her tone gave me chills. Is being wealthy something to brag about? I got into the top university in our country without even attending a preparatory academy. And here I am being looked down upon for not having money. I felt so wronged that I almost cried, but I held it back, finished unpacking, and thought to myself that all that was left was to get used to this house. As soon as I covered myself with the new blanket, I fell into a deep sleep, even if it was just for a short while. That's how the day went. The lady knocked on my door and then started opening my wardrobe. Seeing my shabby underwear and the few clothes I had, I wished for a mouse hole to disappear into. "You can't stay in our house on the days you come home drunk. Just so you know," she said flatly. I bowed my head and promised to be more careful in the future. Teaching James began, and honestly, the middle school exams were predictable. It was clear what kind of questions would come up. After advising James on what to focus on and to study, he came back with good grades. Following this, James' parents' attitude towards me changed slightly. Beyond my monthly salary, they started giving me bonuses, and it seemed like we were having meat dishes more often than usual. Mrs. Smith always had a frosty demeanor, and it was hard to find a smile on her face. James was an average student in my class until I started tutoring him, and then he began to excel, much to everyone's surprise. Mr. Smith, always busy with his business, was thrilled with his only son's improvement and decided to throw a party to celebrate. He bought an enormous amount of groceries, and with the help of the maid, they started preparing. When I offered to help, Mrs. Smith suggested I try a foreign liquor her husband had brought back from a trip. It was my first time trying whiskey, strong but smooth. I was over the moon knowing my students' success led to a bonus and a party. After taking a shower in their luxurious bathroom, I was drying my hair in my room, which, by the way, I'm a bit taller than average and quite fit, something not unnoticed at school. Mrs. Smith, bringing snacks, accidentally walked in on me undressed, dropped the tray and hurried out. Realizing my mistake in not dressing sooner, I was embarrassed, but it seemed unnecessary to lock my door after all. However, Mrs. Smith's attitude towards me subtly changed after that incident. She even bought me new underwear, telling me to feel more at home and no longer worry about such chores. I thanked her, mentioning my salary, but she insisted it was a gift, considering me like a son. It was hard to adjust to this new warmth from her. One evening, with Mr. Smith away, Mrs. Smith, James, and I had dinner. After cutting some mangoes, she suggested watching a popular TV show, but James went to bed early. Mrs. Smith then expressed a wish for us to spend more comfortable time together. The cold beer and the mango were a revelation. Mrs. Smith, usually so formal, was dressed casually, perhaps because her husband wasn't home. Feeling tipsy, I excused myself to bed, but she later knocked on my door, confessing she couldn't sleep well alone and asking for my company. That night, any awkwardness between us vanished. From then on, Mrs. Smith would visit my room when she could, and we shared a closeness unlike any other. At 20, that's how I came to understand women.